Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And at the end of the webinar, I'll talk about how you can access the recording of this webinar, just in case you've got colleagues that were running late or couldn't make it today. So first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to attend today's InfoBurst webinar. Today, we'll be looking at the upcoming InfoBurst version 2022. .4. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Baca. I am the manager of product support at Infosol. So if you work on InfoBurst, you probably worked with myself or one of the InfoBurst team members. My email address is there on the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the Infosol help desk. You can contact me via email. We're always happy to hear from you and help out in any way we can. Okay, so let's get right into InfoBurst 2022.4. So we are just putting the finishing touches on this release, 2022.4. It's a pretty big release in terms of new functionality, which we'll talk about in a moment. So this version has been out in the world as a beta for several months now, with numerous InfoBurst users testing some of this new functionality. So we're just putting a few little tweaks in place right here at the end of the development cycle. So our plan is to release the version next week. Probably try to get this out Monday or Tuesday, but I'm going to say week of December 5th, just to be safe, but we're targeting early next week. And as we'll talk about at the end of the webinar, you can opt in to automatically receive email notifications when we release new versions through our announcements forum up on the Infosol help desk. So this version's coming to you in just a few days. As always, when we release a new version of software, you'll see up on our release notes forum on the Infosol help desk the release notes for that particular version. It's going to give you all the detail about what I'm showing you today, documentation, usage examples, and there will be a reference to this webinar video as well, where we're going to be going hands-on with some of these new features. All right, so let's start with Cloud Drive. So this is a big new feature of InfoBurst in 2022.4, and this is something that our users have been asking for more and more in recent years. So we're happy to finally deliver this to you. And we're not starting with just one cloud drive as we had advertised in our previous webinar. We've actually introduced all 4 major cloud drives. So in InfoBurst 2022.4, users will be able to deliver files to Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, and Box or Box.com. But you will, just like you can with other platforms, you can read files from these environments as well, from these cloud drives. So in addition to delivering files to these cloud drives, we can read files from them, specifically Excel. So if you are one of those users who use Excel as data sources, maybe you use Excel to drive parameter values for bursting or email addresses for delivery, and you store those files on one of these cloud drives, you can create what are called file lists pointing to Excel on a cloud drive, just as you would a network folder or SharePoint. All right, so let's switch over to InfoBurst and take a look at that. So before I go in here, let's just pop over here to System. And on this platforms list, this has gotten much bigger recently. You'll see the 4 cloud drive options, Box.com, OneDrive, Google Drive, and Dropbox. Now, the setup for each of these is roughly the same, but it's a bit of a process. This will involve, depending on the cloud drive, going into that cloud drive environment, setting up what's called an application or an app, which represents the connection between InfoBurst and that platform. You have to go in and set permissions and obtain some identifying values. Once you've got all that in place, then you can create the platform and start using that cloud drive. And when if you're going to use one of these cloud drive platforms, there will be documentation up on the help desk that will guide you through the entire process, right? But once that's done, and once you have your connection in place, let's go over here. That's not where we want to be. We want to be in here. Then you can go about delivering files to your cloud drive or reading files from your cloud drive. So let's start here. We'll just take just a business objects Webby report, but this could be anything. This could be a Power BI report, Tableau. You could run straight database queries and publish that and deliver it up to a cloud drive. Any content that InfoBurst supports, you can deliver to a cloud drive. So in this example, we'll just keep it simple. I'll just put a report in a burst, and we'll go into create a delivery. We'll just call this PDF OneDrive. So from here, I'm going to deliver a BI report, a Webby report, published as PDF up to one of the cloud drives. And I'm going to use OneDrive as our example today. So there's our OneDrive platform. I then go out and browse the cloud drive. This happens to be my personal work OneDrive, and I've got a folder within that I'd like to deliver a file, this share folder here. So I'll select that and save it, and we'll just run that in real time. That should take just a moment. So you'll be hearing the term OAuth from me a few times throughout this webinar. And the reason that we were able to provide support for all of the major cloud drives simultaneously is because they all use a standard authentication method called OAuth 2. So that mechanism is the basis for all these connections that we're making to the cloud drives, and as you'll see a little bit later, to Microsoft as well. So, okay, so that was done. And if we skip over here to the OneDrive folder, if I refresh this, where is that option? Let's just go like that. And there it is. There's our city sales metrics PDF. So like I said, we've had more and more users inquiring about cloud drive support. This will be in 2022.4. If you go to use these platforms, you have any questions about setup, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're glad to help in any way we can. And we are learning from our users as well about how they leverage cloud drives in their corporate environment. So we hope you find that useful. Actually, before we move on, let's also talk about sourcing data from a cloud drive. So here within my OneDrive folder, I also have an Excel file that I would like to use to drive report bursting and email deliveries, right? So to do this in InfoBurst, we use, if we're working with Excel, we use what's called a file list, which is a pointer to an Excel file somewhere out there in the world, network folder, SharePoint in this case, on a cloud drive, OneDrive. So I'm going to create a multi-column list, and I'll call this OneDrive Excel MC list. I'm sorry, that's a multi-column list. We want to create a file list. So let's go here, leave that. Let's do that the right way, Excel file list. Okay, so the source of our file list is a platform, and the platform is our OneDrive cloud drive. And so we simply go out, find the target Excel file, which here is the states list, select it, and save. And now I can preview this, which just brings back the first column. This just validates that InfoBurst can talk to the platform and read the file. So if I click it, it'll go out, and it should bring back the first column of data, which is a list of states. So now I can take this Excel file from OneDrive and use it to drive bursting prompts, report prompts. I can use it for email addresses, customizing things like file names, right? So delivering files to cloud drives, reading Excel from cloud drives. Okay. All right, let's move on to Discover. So if you were on our last webinar, if you've looked at the recent version release notes, you know that in InfoBurst 2022.3, which was released in August, September timeframe, I forget, we introduced this Discover feature, which is built-in InfoBurst reporting in the InfoBurst UI. So within the InfoBurst UI, you can go in and create reports based on InfoBurst activity. What burst supported today, which user owns which objects, all sorts of reports, and we can kind of peruse them again when we look at the example. So that was introduced in what we call version 1 of Discover. So in InfoBurst 2022.4, we're introducing version 2. which adds features on top of that reporting framework. So what can we do in 2022.4? So in this version, you can customize a report. You can save it as a personal report, right? So each time you go into Discover, instead of having to recreate that report with all the options you want, you can save it and reuse it. And then more importantly, you can schedule that saved report for regular delivery, right? So imagine a scenario where you want to know as an administrator what bursts aborted in the previous week. So you can go in and run a report for that, but then you can automate that to say, okay, I want every Monday morning, I want delivered to me automatically a report of all the aborted bursts for the previous week. That's what we can do with the customization and the scheduling of the Discover reports. And then the last option there is just a minor modification to some of the reports, which adds a dynamic drop-down menu for certain parameters, and I'll show you that as well. So let's move over back to the UI, and I'm going to go into the System menu. We'll go into Discover. Now this is new. If you install 2022.3, you would only see these options. You would not see my report. So this is new in 2022.4. And this is blank because I haven't yet saved any reports for myself. So what I'd like to do here, I'm going to go into System. And you can schedule any of these reports to be delivered to you. The one I think users will leverage the most is going to be bursts aborted between. Show me what aborted during a certain time frame and deliver that to me automatically. So let's do that. So I'm just going to run this report. I'm just going to run it for the last month just so we have some data to work with. So let's run it. So these are all the bursts that aborted in the last month. And what I'm going to do here is I want to customize what's in this report. So I'm going to hit Select Columns. And I want to omit a few things. I'm not interested in, let's say, the schedule ID. I don't want the user ID. And I'm not interested in the elapsed time. These are the columns I want in my report. Let's say I want burst status to be the first column in my customized report, right? So I can come in, pick and choose the columns I want, reorder columns the way I want them, hit OK, and there's the resulting customized report. From here, I can save it. So I'm going to save as. It's going to give us a default name. You can make that whatever you want, a description, and then you hit OK, and that's going to move us into the category of my reports automatically. So there's that customized report I just saved, right? So now the great part about this is the ability to now schedule. So if I click the schedule button, I now have available to me the standard InfoBurst scheduler, right? So I can schedule using custom calendars, date macros, anything you want. Let's keep it simple here. Let's just say every Monday at 6 a.m., I want InfoBurst to send to me my my aborted burst report, and the parameters for that here are date from and date to. So I want these from last week to today. So let's say the date from is today, and we're using a macro here. So most of us are familiar with macros and math. So we'll say today minus 7D, right? So that's going to give me a report from last Monday to this Monday. So we'll save that. And now that's going to run every Monday at 6 a.m. for the previous week. And I've run that ahead of time. So if we come down here to the mail client, this is the email that I've received from InfoBurst. It's got the title of my report. And then attached to that is the Excel file that represents my customized report based on that date range. So here are last week's aborted bursts. Okay. Now, before we move out of Discover, let me also show you a small change to some of the system reports. So, and again, this was based on user feedback, very good feedback. We have first, let's see, let's look at this one, documents from a platform. So with this report, I want to see all the documents. Let's say it's Power BI. I can see all the Power BI reports that I've added from that platform. With the previous version of Discover, you had to first identify the ID or name of that platform and then plug it in as a parameter value to run the report. So where possible, we've added drop menus. So we already know what platforms are in the system. So we now present that to you as a drop list. So you don't have to go and find the platform ID to run the report. You'll just select it here. Likewise, for any reports that involve users, those reports had a parameter where you had to know the user's name or ID. Now we simplified that. So if you don't know that information for the parameter, you can just select the little icon there, little blue icon, and that's going to give you a user browser where you can go out and select that user and run that report, right? So again, reports is something new. We've already got feedback. Admins find this very useful, and we want to encourage adoption of this, right? We really want users leveraging Discover as their reporting option, and more importantly, we want your feedback. You know, if there are things that you want to see in Discover that would make it more useful for you, please let us know. Reach out to us on the InfoSol help desk. We do welcome that feedback because we really want this to be a valuable tool for InfoBurst users. All right. All right, let's move on to the next slide then. All right, another new feature, and we don't do this very often, but we've introduced a brand new object in InfoBurst. We call it Memo. This one takes a little bit of explanation, and actually the users that inspired this were on our last webinar. I don't see them here today, although they may have joined late. So I'm going to try to do justice to what they did in InfoBurst, which inspired this new feature. So Memo it's going to look a lot like a burst to you. It's kind of a simplified burst, and we gave it a brand new name, new icon, Memo. But the purpose of a memo is very specific, right? So if I have, and you know, we've got a lot of users on the line or on the webinar today. So let me try to summarize what users do today with InfoBurst, and maybe this will make more sense in the UI. Let's just skip over here. And let's go like, what do we want to do here? So let's start with the data source. Okay, so most of you are probably familiar with the concept of data-driven bursting and delivery, right? So we take a BI report, Tableau, Webby, Power BI, and we're going to burst it, right? We're going to burst by state or region or something where we are driving the bursting values with a source, a data source. That data source could be a database query. It could be an Excel file. In this case, it could be a multi-column list, right? Any supported data source, our users use those to drive the input, which is the bursting values, and then the output, which is the email recipients, customized file names, subject lines. These are all using what we call extra columns, right? So the primary column in this example is the state. We're going to burst a report by state, but then we can use all these other values to do email delivery, customizations, and things like this. So it's data source plus extra columns. And this is intended for that purpose, right? Burst a BI report, deliver it to someone. Well, our users are very creative, and one of them figured out a way to use InfoBurst to satisfy their organization's email requirements using a burst. This is a little out there, but let me try to explain it to you. So let's come over here and let me just try to explain what they did. This is great. So they said, okay, we know that InfoBurst can mail. We know that it can pull information from a database to customize things. And we want to use that to send out personalized emails to people, but not send them any report content. And that's what a burst is, right? It's to deliver BI report content. So what they did in a nutshell is they said, okay, we're going to take a dummy report because they don't intend to deliver this to anyone. So they said, okay, let's put a dummy report in a burst. We need to wire up a data source because that's where they're getting the information for these customized emails, right? Recipient, subject, message, whatever it is they want to use to customize the message, right? So they apply the data source, then they set up a delivery. And again, they're not delivering this report to these users. So they just set up a dummy delivery where they're saying, okay, because we have to deliver the report somewhere, we'll just send it out to a folder that no one's looking at. It's just a dummy, right? But here's what they did. They said, okay, because we can leverage a notification that says, lets an email recipient know when we've delivered content, they used that message field to create this custom message from the data driven by the database. And the result of this is a PDF file in a folder that no one ever sees, but then a message that is unique for each user because we're getting the data from the database. I know that's a a big explanation of what they were doing. But the end result is they're kind of using InfoBurst in a brand new way to drive intelligent emailing with no content delivery. So we saw this at the last IBIS, and we were really inspired. And ironically, we've actually had a few other users since that time come to us and request roughly the same functionality independent of the other users. So this does look like something that users that would add value for users. So let me show you how this works. So we want to take the whole element of content delivery out of it because that's not what's happening here. We're just emailing, excuse me. So let's go back to our data source and forget all about that state column. We don't need it. What we want is all the email elements, right? So we have a column for recipients, and then I have a few other columns that I would use to customize the emails that InfoBurst is sending, right? Database-driven emailing. So I'm going to say new, and we have a brand new object on the menu called memo. It's got the little blue icon. Like I said, this is going to look like a bit like a burst. Let's call this, we'll call it memo demo. That's what I called it before. I'm going to save that. Then InfoBurst will go out and display for me data sources because any of these is a candidate. I've got, there's the data source we just looked at, the multi-column list. Now InfoBurst is going to automatically do a few things. Yes, it looks like a burst, but all you see in here is an item called memo. This is not changeable. That just represents the data source that we're leveraging. And this memo knows that we're emailing, so it automatically creates an email delivery, right? It knows this. It knows that's what you're doing. That is the purpose of a memo. So we've already wired up the recipient, which is the email column. That's the present email. And you'll notice you can't add and remove things here. The purpose of this is solely to say, take this data source and use it to send emails to people in the email column. So that's the starting point. That's all done for you. Then we can create a custom message. So here, let's say I want to say, I don't know, hey, we want to personalize this with the user's name, which is a column in the data source. So there's the name column. I'm going to double click that. So that's a placeholder, and then we'll say we just want to include the message because each user has their own customized message in that data source, like that. And I will save that. So each recipient's going to get their own customized message as defined in the source. Then I'll go ahead and customize the subject as well using that same logic. So let's say performance update 4, and then we'll use the user's name as a placeholder. So let's apply that. Save. I'm going to run this and we'll see the result. So in the case of the user that inspired this, they're sending out thousands of emails to customers where all the information that they use to create these dynamic emails is stored in the database. InfoBurst can get to that. It can read all those columns, and they can create any type of customized message they want for these users. What I didn't mention, and maybe we'll just talk about it here in context. Let me just pull that. So I've got those two users in here, Brian and John. And if we look here, right, there's performance update for Brian. We pulled that from the database, the name value. Hey, Brian, that's that value again. And here's the custom message for that user in the data source. And then again, here's John's customized message, right? Hey, John, oh, we have some concerns about your performance. Let's talk. That came from the data source as well, right? So I hope you see the concept here. And these are just basic messages, right? That's just text in the message. But as you probably know, within an InfoBurst message and a delivery, you can leverage HTML tags. So you can format this text with fonts and colors and hyperlinks and images. So you can really make this into a nice looking email, all driven by your existing InfoBurst implementation. This is not an add-on. It's just a new feature that we're offering. And we'll be really interested to see what folks think about this. So I see a lot of questions and comments coming in. I'm going to address those at the end. Okay. Let's move on to Power BI. So we've added a few enhancements around Power BI. So we've seen a tremendous amount of activity from our InfoBurst users, potential InfoBurst users of business objects that are using InfoBurst's Power BI integrations to add value, right, to both business objects and Power BI. Primarily, we're seeing users that they have a coexistence. They've got business objects and Power BI, and they're using the InfoBurst Power BI add-on to pull data out of business objects, a Webby report or business objects universe, and automatically push that or send that into Power BI as a data set. We've also seen lots of users that are interested in publishing a Power BI report. So just like you would your Tableau workbooks or your Webby reports, right? Burst, publish, and deliver, right? Their Power BI reports. And so we've been talking to a lot of Power BI users and learning from them. And one of the things we learned is that when it comes to data sets and data flows in Power BI, forget InfoBurst for a moment. These are just native data sets and data flows that users have created. These things can be scheduled, and the current scheduler in Power BI is very basic, basically on this day at this time. And users that come to InfoBurst tend to have more advanced requirements in all these areas, including scheduling. So users of Power BI add-on in InfoBurst are looking at it saying, well, in InfoBurst, we have all these advanced scheduling options. We can schedule based on events like database queries and trigger files. We can use date macros. We can use custom calendars. And they would like to be able to schedule their native Power BI data sets and data flows using that same scheduling functionality. So in 2022.4, we've added the ability to add to InfoBurst a data set or a data flow from Power BI, and then schedule that just like we would anything else in InfoBurst. I'm going to show you that in a moment, but before I do, there's just one small note about this. Like, let's say, your delivery of your Webby reports or your Tableau or your Power BI reports, right? You have the ability to, for InfoBurst to report out status, right? So maybe a Webby refresh failed and you want to send that as an alert to a user in an email, right? This is more basic. So the Power BI API allows us, InfoBurst, to go in and tell Power BI to run something, right? A data set or a data flow. That's the functionality that we have here. But unfortunately, at this time, the Power BI APIs do not give us the option to know the status of that refresh, right? So we can submit the request, but we can't know what happened. We can't know if it succeeded or failed. But we, sorry about that. My headset just died on me. John Shields, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I just need to play a little trick to keep my headset from shutting down. There we go. Okay, so long story short, we can schedule the refresh of a data set or a data flow, but we can't go on and do things like actions based on status, right? But that might be something that we see in the future from Microsoft. So let me switch over. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to say new document. And in this case, it's not actually a document. This is going to be a data set from Power BI, right? It exists in Power BI. So I have my Power BI platform here. I'm going to browse. Let's go in here to the InfoBurst workspace. And within that, you can see there's a new icon here, DS, data set. I don't have any data flows in this particular workspace, so we're going to work with a data set. So I'll just grab this one, city orders, select. And once we have this data set in InfoBurst, then we can go ahead and do what we do. Now we are going to add it to a burst because in InfoBurst, we schedule bursts, right? The thing that you want to schedule has to be in something else, in this case, a burst. So what we do is we put the data set or the data flow in a burst, and you'll notice we've automatically inserted a delivery, right? Because there is no delivery here. We're just telling Power BI, go run this thing. So you don't actually set up deliveries or parameters or anything like that. It's just a container to schedule the data source. So once we put it in a burst, then we can go on and add it to a schedule where we can leverage all of those features, right? We want to run our data sets every 5 minutes, or we want to run it based on a macro, or we want to use an event, a database query. All of the advanced features of InfoBurst scheduling are now available to schedule those native Power BI data sets and data flows. All right, let's move on. So this is a series of enhancements kind of at a generic system level that we'll go through. First of all, we've seen more and more users leveraging the system operator role and had requests for system operator to have access to users' home folders, right? Basically a pseudo administrator, the only thing they can't do is actually get to the admin menu and do things. So in 2022.4, the sysop, or the system operator, can now see user folders and can access them. Okay, this is another big change. So let me talk about kind of the context here. And actually, let's do this. I'm going to switch over to the UI in a moment. So we have added in this version of InfoBurst support for another authentication method to Microsoft, which is Azure AD OAuth. And this exists for SharePoint and Power BI. Okay. And let's go into the UI and talk about this in context, because there are a lot of things that I want to convey to you here. Give me just 1 second here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to say new platform, and let's start with SharePoint. This is going to look a little bit different. We've done a lot of enhancements here, and specifically we're looking at the authentication section. So as you can see, there are now 4 different ways that InfoBurst can authenticate to SharePoint. Let's start with this one, user credentials. This is what's known in Microsoft as basic authentication, okay? In the beginning, if you used InfoBurst with SharePoint, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, the only option, well, you had 2 options actually. User credentials, which means you set up a platform, then the Microsoft user provides their credentials, their email address and password to authenticate to SharePoint. If Microsoft has officially deprecated this. Now, what I know is that they are turning it off in their tenants in kind of a rolling manner. I can't be more specific than that, but basically I think they're kind of flicking the light switch for people to say, look, we're going to turn it off, break things for you, and then turn it back on so we get your attention. And they've been telling their users for years that they're going to do this, but they have been doing it. I think they were supposed to have deprecated basic authentication end of last year, but I think they've kind of delayed that. But I know that there are users that are encountering this where that authentication method stops working. So if you're using basic authentication, you're providing user credentials, you need to consider getting off of that ASAP. It's going to stop any day if it hasn't already. We can't exactly say when, but this is your alert. Start looking at these new authentication options. The second one, SharePoint app, has been available for a while. And this is where you set up instead of users authentication, you set up what's called an app in SharePoint, and then InfoBurst authenticates as the app instead of a user. Some of you are using this, but Microsoft is kind of hinting that this might go away as well, right? They want everyone going through Azure AD. So if you're using SharePoint app, that's better than user credentials, but you should also start planning to transition to one of the modern authentication options that I'll discuss next. The first one is Azure App plus certificate. So if you were using SharePoint app, you know that this is authentication at an app level. So there is no user here. There's an app, there's an ID, and then anyone that has access to that platform can see everything, let's say in that particular SharePoint site. But there are user environments where access to contents within a site is based on your user access, right? So user A can see everything, user B can only see certain libraries, something like that. So you know that this app approach doesn't cater for that user level security. Likewise, this Azure AD app plus certificate is the same app approach, but the app is actually created in Azure, and it has an accompanying certificate, as part of the authentication. So you can think of this as kind of the successor to this, but it still has the same restriction, which is it's an application model. Anyone with access to that platform can see everything in that SharePoint site. So in 2022.4, we've introduced another authentication method, and thank you, UNH. I see Lindsay on the call. They worked very hard with us to get this authentication method ironed out. So in 2022.4, you have the option to use what's called delegated OAuth. What that means is that we're still using an app in Azure as the entry point. That's how we get into Azure. But then the actual authentication is delegated to Microsoft, where Microsoft authenticates their Microsoft user. InfoBurst basically gets a token for that user, and that's what we use every time we access the environment, SharePoint in this example. So it does overcome the limitation of the pure app approach, which is everyone can see everything. Using this model, you get the best of all worlds, right? We get the modern authentication method, plus we retain that user level security into Microsoft. So we got several users that are using this now in beta. And so within the InfoSol help desk, you're going to find some really detailed documentation about everything I've just told you. And it can be a little bit daunting, but we try to lay it all out here. And this one's the SharePoint access document. There's also one for Power BI in the help desk. And it's going to lay out all the authentication models and hopefully help you to make a decision about what works best for you, right? What's based on your environment's requirements. So have a look at it. If you have questions, please come to us. We've worked with a lot of customers to help make these decisions and kind of navigate what can be a fairly complex setup process in Microsoft. But at the end of the day, we think that this is a really good authentication model. It's, according to Microsoft, it is the most secure model, and they're pushing everyone to it. So don't struggle with this. Reach out. We're happy to have a conversation about how to get you to this OAuth authentication model to Microsoft. And likewise with Power BI, well, actually there are less here because Power BI is newer, right? It never had the legacy authentication type. So in the Power BI world, you have, again, application plus certificate, application plus secret. These are basically the same thing. One uses a secret value, the other uses, it's more secure, uses a certificate. But then again, we have the OAuth option for Power BI as well. So our recommendation is OAuth for either Power BI or SharePoint. This is the way forward, and we're happy to help you get there and test that out. Okay, so let's talk about that. Actually, I want to mention one more thing about SharePoint. Let's go back to that. So when we set up the platform here for SharePoint, we provide a URL to a site, right? And if you used, for SharePoint, if you use the user credentials model or you use the SharePoint app model, you know that you had to have one platform per site. So if you had 50 SharePoint sites you want to deliver to, that meant you had to have 50 platforms. The same would be true of the Azure AD plus apps plus certificate, where you'd still need 50 platforms and 50 apps, and it becomes a bit of a maintenance struggle, right? So this is another reason why OAuth is so great, is because let's just say I don't know, something like this, acme.com/counting, something like that. Let's just say that's our site URL. There's an option. Well, actually, I'm not going to create it. I can show you one. I'm not going to show you. These are all actually active apps. I don't want to show you my IDs and secrets. But basically, when you create a SharePoint platform using OAuth, you're going to create it pointing to a specific site. However, you can give the users the option to override that URL at the delivery level. So the idea here is this is the gateway into SharePoint. But if the user wants to deliver to some other site on the same tenant, acme.com, they can provide the URL at the delivery level and deliver to that other site without the need for a platform for that site. So in theory, let's say you had those 50 site platforms in InfoBurst, you can consolidate that down to one. and then let users define their own sites at delivery level. And I know there are several of you that that do this. You have lots of SharePoint sites set up. Moving from that older authentication method or the per site setup to this would require a bit of maintenance, right? So you're going to have all these deliveries that are pointing to platforms, all those various platforms. So there would be a bit of a process to set up the new OAuth, and then you'd have to go in and repoint all your deliveries to that new platform. But in our opinion, in the long run, that's going to be much better for you from a maintenance perspective, right? Instead of maintaining 50 platforms, you only have to do the one. So if you think you fall into that category, reach out to us on the help desk. Let's have a conversation, and we'll talk about how to get you from where you are to where we think you should be. Okay, then the last bit I want to talk about here, I think, this is just a small enhancement to the Burst UI. Let's come over here, again, user inspired. So let's go into actually, let's come in here. Okay, I have a document here called Daily Forecast. I'm just going to add that to a burst. Now, if you use filtering on any document type in a burst, could be Webby, could be Tableau, right, or whatever you use, and you opt to add a filter, right? I'm going to do that. So you know that you have to select a filter variable from a list of variables. And in the real world, right, we've seen these lists be hundreds of items long. You might have hundreds of objects in the report, and that would mean scrolling all the way through the list to find the one you want. Now, if that list is more than 10 items, we will automatically render this search variable, and you can type a name, and it will search for that value in that long list. So you don't have to scroll through that list anymore. Just start typing the name of the thing you want, and it will automatically render it in that list, and then you can add your filter. So just a little time saver for those of you that have more complex reports. And then, yes, Tom, I see you on the call. Thank you for the yay. This one is inspired by one of our users as well. And again, just a little time saver. If you have, let's just do it. We're here. Let's just add a delivery of type email. And I'm just going to add myself. That's spelled wrong, but that's okay. Okay, so we have a user. In the past, if you want to delete this user from your recipient list, you'd have to open it, click delete, click the confirmation dialog to remove them. Now you just have a little delete icon here, a little trash can, just hit it, confirmation, delete, and it's gone. So hopefully that saves you a few clicks in the process of deleting a user from a delivery recipient list. Okay, there are less and less of you these days that fall into this category, but for those of you that are still on Build 240, please start considering your move to 64-bit. 2022.4 represents the 8th 64-bit release since we moved off of 32-bit, which is 240. So we really want you current so that you can take advantage of all these new features, and obviously take advantage of any bug fixes that might help you. So help.infosol.com, search, just do a search and type in 64-bit, you'll find this document. This lays out the entire process of getting you migrated off of 32-bit onto 64-bit. It's actually a pretty painless process, just a little planning and testing, which we're happy to help with. But please, 240, be thinking about your move to 64-bit. Like I said, the webinar recording will be available no later than tomorrow at this time, maybe later today, up there if you want to go check. And I do know that John will send out an automatic email when that video is published, so you'll be alerted as well that this recording is available. Okay, what's next? We don't currently have the next webinar planned. We're coming into the holidays, so we want to give everyone a chance to breathe. But probably sometime in January, we're going to have a webinar focused on features and functionality, not a version release webinar. But as soon as we have that ready, we'll post that up on events.infosol.com. And if you're registered for the webinar series, you'll automatically be alerted of that upcoming webinar. So make sure you register there. And then the next version will be 2023.1. We don't have a time frame for release yet, and we're still actually working on, well, we're still technically in our 2022.4 dev cycle, so we've not really put together a roadmap yet, but we'll start getting that information out to users as we get there. What I can say is that SAP plan to release BI 4.2 SP03. Looks like the second week, maybe the end of next week or the second week of December. And as soon as that's out, we're going to start qualifying it. That's a big service pack for 4.3, and our plan is to support 4.3 SP03 in 2023.1. And if any other major releases, Tableau or other platforms are updated in that time, then we'll do our best to get those qualified and supported for 2023.1 as well. Okay, so the usuals here. We want you to stay informed. As I said at the outset, if you do nothing else, you're a help desk user, go to the announcements forum and click, I think it's follow. There's a follow button, and that will ensure that you get notified of the critical stuff. You know, when is a new version released? If we have any critical announcement that we want users to be aware of, we'll make it there. We're not going to spam that forum with anything other than the essentials, but that's the one I'd say follow if you're going to follow anything. Again, we're out there on LinkedIn, just search InfoBurst. We're on Twitter. We put information out there as well. So at this point, I'm going to go over and look. Oh, wow. So we've got a lot of comments and questions. So what I'm going to do first, because they are in separate categories, is I'm going to go through the questions first. Let's see. Tom asked, how does it email it to you? Tom, I assume you're referring to the Discover report scheduled. If that's not correct, just update in the chat, and we'll clarify. But I think that's what you're saying. So it is you created and saved a report for you. Your user profile has an email address, and that's how InfoBurst knows where to send that Discover report that's been scheduled. And then Tom goes on to ask, I think you were looking at one of the platform reports, which says documents from a platform, right? That's the one I showed. I think that's what you're referring to. And the question is, can you select multiple platforms? That is a no, but please, everyone, Discover, we want you in there, we want you using it, and we want your input. So within the, let's go look at it. Within the, let's go over, sorry. Let's go over here. We might as well look at it. help.infosol.com. Let's go here. Let's go user influence, and let's do that. Right. So within the forum, within the help desk, go to forums. You'll see the user influence forum. This is where we want you to go to give us your ideas. And we've gotten lots of great ideas, not just for Discover, but for InfoBurst as a whole. So Tom, like if that's something that you see useful for a Discover report, which is a report that says, show me documents for these list of platforms, head in here, make that request. Everything that gets put into the user influence forum, we will evaluate for future development. So this is where we go to make those recommendations. Lindsay asks, is OData intended to replace OData reporting that was previously used? Absolutely, yes. OData was very useful. And in fact, if you look at Discover, it's going to look the reports that are available. Everything that was in OData is in Discover, plus some new things. The reason that we moved away from OData is because it's not within our control. So InfoBurst, the platform, provides an OData feed that you can consume with Excel, but we've seen over the years is a very inconsistent implementation of OData from Microsoft. So for example, we'd have users that would try to connect to our OData feed and it would fail. And then another user with another version of Excel would work. And it was like Microsoft would fix it and then break it, and fix it and break it. And if they couldn't access OData from Excel due to a Microsoft issue, then there was nothing we could do to help, right? We just provide the feed. So that just got a little bit old, and we decided let's bring it all in-house, right? So you can produce those reports internally, produce them as Excel, right? So that is, yes, we want you using Discover instead of OData. OData is still there. We're not taking it away. If it works for you and you like it, you're free to keep using it, but we're not enhancing it anymore. We're not going to be changing it. We're not going to be adding reports. All of that's going to come in-house into Discover. Okay, let's see. Kurt says, if we have more than one content creator with their own OneDrive accounts, will IBE be able to support them independently? Yes, and that's why we want to talk to users. If anyone is interested in using cloud drives, please reach out to us on the help desk. We want to talk to you because we have given you the ability to connect to OneDrive and deliver to and read from those drives, but how organizations use them, right? Do they have folders that are available to the organization that they're working with? Are these personal folders? We're still learning on that account. But to your question, Kirk, yes. I mean, any SharePoint user can set up what's called an app, and that's our channel into that particular drive to read and write. So you could, in theory, have multiple platforms, one per, as you say, content creator, right? But when you get to that point, come talk to us. Let's talk about how best to get that implemented, and we will be learning from you. Let's see. Kirk says, when is 2022.4 being released? Next week. I'd say midweek at the latest. Monday, if we are really on top of things. So again, look for those announcements, and as soon as we've released that, you'll know it. But no later than next Wednesday, I'd say. Let's see. Tom says, can you figure out how to schedule a Tableau prep? Again, if you would give us the details here in the user influence forum, right? All the technical details about what it is, what's the use case, why would you want to do that? Let's have a conversation about it and see if it's a good fit for InfoBurst. Okay, so Tom says, yes, that's right. Okay, so those are the questions. Now I'm going to move up to the comments, which are mostly questions. All right, so Kirk, you asked that in questions as well. We'll skip over that. Let's see, user Paul Grill says, in the memo option, can we customize the from email as well so we can change email of who's sending? The answer to that, Paul, is yes. So if we come over here, I'll just show you how that works. That's really easy. Let's close this. I'm going to go back into my data source, right? And we'll just add a from column. We'll say add, and let's just, yeah, save that. Let's come here and we'll say from the boss at infoburst.net, right? And then let's say there's an address here as well. So each recipient could have a different address in the from column, right? That's entirely possible. Then if we go back to the burst that we used to create the memo, if I come into options here, there's my from. Let's hope this works. Yep, there it is. So I would add the from column to the from field, and every message that goes out is going to have the from address from that recipient's row in the data source. So short answer, Paul, is yes. Yes, I agree, Barbara. Nice job, Lindsay. Again, great thanks to UNH. They really helped us get this OH stuff out the door. We have users doing the wave in the chat. That's kind of cool. Let's see, that quick question. This one comes from Craig. Hey, Craig. Is there a place within IB that will display all schedules to make it easy to see schedules that will be hitting their end dates soon? All schedules. Let's see. Let's come in here and take a look at what we've got. Discover system. Okay, so again, here I am preaching Discover. And Craig, you might not be on a version that has Discover yet, but that's where you should be. So, and actually, I'm going to show you how to do it with Discover, which is where we want you doing it. If you're on an older version, there are other ways to do it. If you could reach out to me on the help desk, I'll tell you how that is. I don't want to show it here because I don't want users using the old method. We want them using the new one. So within Discover, you have a category called objects. Actually, let's do objects with references. And there is a schedule report. I can run that. And this is going to give me all schedules in the system, and more importantly, their frequencies, run times. If there's a between, a start and end date, you're going to see that information as well. So yes, you can get that information from the Discover reports. Like I said, if you're not able to get current just now, then reach out to us, and there's another legacy report that you can run. Let's see, that's that. Twitter. If from is blank in the list, will the fail or send from a blank entity? Kirk, you ask great questions. I don't actually know what will happen in that scenario. I'm guessing we're going to take the value in the cell, which is blank. And so in theory, the mail server is going to reject that message because it doesn't have a from address. But I can test that. If you can anticipate that being an issue, let's talk about it on the help desk, and we can devise a solution. Okay, let me just take one quick more look at chat. That one's good. Questions. I'm sorry. Okay, Tom's asked one more question. We're coming up on the end of this. Can I move my filter lists to Teams? They are eliminating our file share. Filter lists. Do you mean, you say filter list, are you talking about Excel? That's really the only list you can have in a file share. I'm assuming that's Excel. Hold on, looking. Yes, you say. No, Teams is not a supported source of files. So you could put them on SharePoint. And if you don't have the ability to put them on network folders in 2022.4, you can also put them on Box, OneDrive, Dropbox, and Google Drive. So there are numerous options there, but Teams is not currently one of them. I don't actually know if that's even an option for us, but let's talk about it. Reach out, and we can have a discussion about that as well. So, okay, yep, Kirk says if then logic and macros would be really useful. Please, you guys all have great ideas, but we get a lot of them. We've got, I don't know what our count is, but we've got several hundred customers worldwide. So please make use of that user influence forum. Not only do we get your ideas and we can kind of work out the details in a conversation about what it means technically in the use cases, but we can also have a conversation with other users, right? Other users can come in and see your ideas, add ideas to that, and we can kind of refine what it is our users are looking for, so that when we choose to implement features, we're doing it the right way. It's what people want. So, okay, we've reached the top of the hour. Thank you all for hanging out this long. We always appreciate your time. We're always looking to make this product more useful to you. So, we'll keep having these webinars. Again, make sure you're registered at events.infosol.com. Make sure you're registered for the announcements forum on the help desk. And with that, wish you all a pleasant day, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.